Welcome to the Indie Book Club, which is brought to you by Inkspot Publishing. And I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Pierce, broadcaster and journalist, and now author of his first book, Finding Margaret. And this is published by Bite Back Books, and I believe it's become a Sunday Times bestseller too.
It has, which was a big thrill for me because it is my first book, and I had no idea if anybody was interested in the story about some bloke who's looking at search for his birth mother, but it just took off. I think it struck a chord with a lot of women and a lot of mums,
Yes.
and a lot of mums who'd either given up children for adoption, perhaps in the 60s or the 50s, or knew people who had. And also it struck a chord, I think, Catherine, with a lot of children like me who are agonising over whether to track down a birth parent or track down a birth parent, and discovered it's not like it always is on the television. It
Yes,
doesn't
I'm
always
sure.
end.
There's a lot of romance about it, I suppose, especially from Hollywood and, all the tear-jerking movies, but the reality can be quite different, can't it? And I found your story incredibly poignant, very moving. And so I'm really delighted you're here to chat about it. But can you just first describe what prompted you to write the story in the first place? Because it's a very personal tale.
Well, I'd hardly ever talked about being adopted. Very few people knew. My inner circle knew. I was adopted when I was 3, so I spent the first 3 years of my life in an orphanage in Cheltenham run by the Sisters of Nazareth, and I think it's fair to say I don't think the milk of human kindness particularly coursed through the good sisters' veins. But the search for my birth mother was tumultuous and emotional and complicated, and there were twists and turns all the way. And I was actually having dinner with my good friend Andrew Marr and his wife Jackie Ashley. She was a columnist on The Guardian. I knew her from Westminster. I've known Andrew for years. And they just said one night, they knew the story that I'd found Margaret. They said, you should share that story, because I was there with Amanda Patel, who'd been with me. She's a fellow columnist on the Daily Mail. She'd been with me every step of this journey, and I talked about it one night, and you could have heard a pin drop with Jackie and Andrew and their 2 daughters, and they said, you should share it. So what do you mean? They said, write a book about it. I said, well, I've never written a book, and who'd be interested? And I thought about it, and a couple of weeks later, I looked at my computer and thought, well, I suppose I could write a few words. Before I knew it, I'd written 85,000.
It's very cathartic, I'm sure, that whole process of writing your story down. Did you find it?
It was incredibly cathartic because I realised I was confronting emotions that I'd ignored for years, and it made me cry at points, and I had to stop at points. And a big part of why it took me so long to find Margaret, I didn't start searching for her properly till I was 48, was because I agonised over my mum, Betty, who adopted me when I was 3 with George. They already had 3 children of their own, and they took this peculiar little boy who they found in an orphanage into their home and treated me as their own, as
You
an
were
equal
so
from the very
lucky,
beginning.
weren't you? I mean, when you think about it, they went to this orphanage and they could have chosen any one of how many children were there?
When I was there, I think there were 48 children in there.
And yet they chose you, which is
Yeah,
brilliant.
they wanted a boy because they'd got 2 girls, Susan and Shirley, and then Christopher followed next. And Mum had lost 2 children in labour. One was a boy, one was a girl, but they wanted a boy. And I think they realised very quickly that the toddlers were likely to hang around for quite a long time because people wanted babies, because you could mould a baby right from the beginning. And I apparently was shy, retiring, hardly spoke, was stubborn,
And
almost
by the way, no,
curmudgeonly.
it's not surprising you were shy and retiring, as we'll come to later on, but
Yeah.
do carry on.
So they were introduced to me, and I was then Patrick James. I didn't know at the time, I didn't know for many years that my surname was Connolly. My birth mother was an Irish Roman Catholic nurse, and they would take me out for walks, and then they would take me out, and they didn't have very much money, so there weren't any big treats, but they would take a packed lunch which they'd have with me in a park, and gradually this little boy started to speak a little more, and they, after a few weeks, took Susan, Shirley and Chris, my brother, to Cheltenham on a bus, because there was no car in those days, to see this little boy, and they took a shine to him too. And I think if they hadn't, I'd probably have still been in the home some time later. So I got lucky, not just because they took a shine to me, but because they turned out to be the most wonderful parents anybody could ever ask for.
And also the children were very involved in the whole process, which is amazing, isn't it? They were quite keen on bringing you into their family as well.
Yeah, and my brother and sisters were very keen, and it meant for my brother in particular somebody he could boss around, a little brother, and he continued to boss me around until I left school when I was 18.
As the older sister, I get that.
Yeah, and they also got involved in choosing my name, and there was lots of names that were picked. Mum and Dad didn't want me to stay Patrick because very Irish, and they weren't Irish, and I think they knew. Well, they would have known about my birth mother, but they didn't do the adoption with her. She'd given me up when I was 2 years and 8 months. And then she handed me over to the Catholic Children's Society, who effectively ran the orphanage. So they had no contact with her, but they would have known that she was an Irish nurse. And I think they thought part of the break for Patrick from the orphanage and that Irish heritage would be to have a non-Irish name. So they called me Andrew, of course. And of course, Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland, of all places.
That process of changing your name when you were so young must have been very confusing for you. And you do go into that a little bit about how obviously there wasn't much understanding of psychology at the time. And that did cause quite a few issues, didn't it? Unwittingly on the part of your adopted family.
Yeah, they did their best, Mum and Dad.
I totally understand, yeah. But it wasn't always easy, was it? It wasn't all plain sailing.
There were issues because they didn't have the benefit of all these highfalutin sociology and psychologist books. They thought they had to break the link between Patrick and the orphanage. So they used to say to me, Patrick's in the cupboard, because I had this new name of Andrew, and I can still remember vividly it being tiny, below the kitchen sink, staring at the cupboard, which was this pantry, which was floor to ceiling. We lived in it was a little semi-detached 1950s council house. That was home, but that was a palace to my mum and dad, and to me actually. And so I struggled with it, not least because when I was in the orphanage, the nuns used to say if I was bad, they used to lock me in a cupboard. Yeah. And that was one of the punishments if you wet the bed, and I was a terrible bedwetter. So Patrick was often shut in the cupboard, so then Mum and Dad probably hadn't realised that. So it did cause all sorts of, I suppose, emotional problems for Patrick in coming to terms with this new boy, this new life. And of course also what they were doing was, I was also trying to come to terms with, without knowing it, because I was so young, rejection by my birth mother, because one day she just stopped coming to see me. She'd been visiting me regularly in the home, you see. She was a nurse in Birmingham. I was in Cheltenham, 45 miles, I think. So she was coming on a bus. And then one day she doesn't come and see her little boy anymore. And I don't know what the nuns said, but I don't suppose they were particularly charitable. Did they say, she doesn't love you anymore, she's gone away, she's dead? I don't know. Mum and Dad, it's one area Mum and Dad never talked to me about, ever. And we never really ever talked about the orphanage, actually. We just talked about the fact that, I always knew I was adopted, but we just never talked about the orphanage. And I know that my parents thought, I know in hindsight, that they thought it was a very bad place and they had to get me away from it as soon as possible.
And they were right, weren't they? They were absolutely right. And wasn't it a stroke of luck that wasn't there an outbreak of was it? I can't remember which.
Measles.
Measles.
It was measles.
That's it.
Yeah.
You were visiting them, and
I got lucky because Mum and Dad, as they became more and more intent on perhaps adopting me, they took me away for the weekend. So they then have this arduous trip back to Cheltenham on the bus, which is 2 hours. When they get to the orphanage, it's in quarantine because there's a measles outbreak. So Mum and Dad didn't want to put me in there because of all the discomfort. So they said to the nuns, can we take him back? And they said, okay. And then from that process point onwards, they fostered me. So they were then my foster parents. So this is November 63, something like that. So Patrick's 2.5 now, going on. No, he's 2 years, 9, 10 months. And then the following summer, they formally adopted me. So I never went back. And again, that's wonderful and very lucky, but it also meant Patrick never said goodbye to his little friends.
Yes.
And he never said goodbye to some of the nice ladies who worked there, and even
If
some
there
of the
were
nuns.
any, yes. Yeah, if indeed there were any nice ladies working there. I'm sure
Yeah.
there must have been one or two,
Of course
but
there were.
yeah. So yes, no, I can really imagine how upsetting that must have been for a child. And so you basically went back to Cheltenham, didn't you, when you started working, which is quite a interesting twist of fate, isn't it?
Yeah, it was fascinating because I always wanted to be a reporter from about the age of 14. You have to remember, my family, nobody did A-levels in my family, and nobody really did GCSEs or O-levels. So I was lucky that whatever my birth parents gave me, they gave me an aptitude for learning, and they certainly gave me an aptitude to speak and write.
They're a bright
And
family, weren't they? You had engineers, you had all sorts of
yeah,
really clever
well,
people in your family.
Margaret claimed that my birth father, and we don't know if he is my birth father or not, was an engineer, but in fact he wasn't. He was a
No,
pipe
I mean
layer.
your adoptive family. They were
Oh, my,
quite a clever
exactly.
bunch,
Yeah.
weren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to be a reporter, and what happened when I was 15, Mum had pushed this article across the table at me, the Daily Mirror. We were a Daily Mirror family, traditional working class family, always voted Labour. And there was an article in that paper by Marge Proops, who was then a legendary agony aunt, saying it was right that adopted children like me should be able to track down their birth parents. I knew nothing about this law change. Mum said we wouldn't stand in your way. I could see she was upset about it, so I simply wrote a letter to Marjorie Proop saying, "You're wrong. Blood isn't thicker than water. I don't need another mum. The one I've got is the one who adopted me and my dad." Blow me down. They published it. Cause a lot of joshing at school, all the boys calling me Marge. Roll forward to 18 when I applying for jobs for newspapers, and I'd written 11 out of 12 newspapers on my list. Most of the newspapers never even replied. There was one left on the list, and it was the Gloucestershire Echo in Cheltenham. And Mum said, "You've got to write to that newspaper." And I said, "Imagine, Mum, if I went to Cheltenham, it'd be where it all began." And of course that was the job I got. And you know, the editor of the newspaper was a man called Tom Hoy. We always called him Mr. Hoy. He was looking through, I'd done lots of letters to newspapers to try and get published, to get a newspaper job. The one he was most interested in was the letter to Marge Proops about adoption, because he told me his own children, he and his wife had adopted 2 children. No doubt, in my view, my adoption got me my first job in newspapers. And what a place to get the job. Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, and the newspaper office was literally maybe 800 yards from where the orphanage used to stand.
Incredible.
Who'd have thought it?
Who indeed, yeah, exactly. So back to Cheltenham, where it all began, yeah. So when you decided finally to, by the way, before we get to finding Margaret, I have to say one of the things that really struck me about your book is what incredibly amazing friends you have, because you basically had Amanda Platel and Jane Moore and various others helping you every step of the way. And they weren't only, they were not only your friends, but they actually seemed to be more your family. So you've obviously been really incredibly good at creating this network of people who really care about you. And that's a real testament to, I felt when I was reading the book. It's just, so can you tell me, when you decided to finally track Margaret, first of all, what prompted you to do it? And secondly, how did Jane and Amanda help you?
Well, Amanda in particular, Patel and I are especially close, and she lost a brother a couple of years before I met her. He died. He was only in his early 40s, and he died of a form of asbestosis from work he'd done as a student, and he was a pharmacist, and he had 2 young children, and it was devastating for Amanda. She had one other brother, and devastating for her parents. And Amanda and I became incredibly close, and her parents, Frank and Norma, who I absolutely loved, said, "You know, Mandy, when you met Andrew, we now know God sent you Andrew. After we lost Michael, he was sent to you by the good Lord, and they really believe this. Jesus sent you, God sent you, Andrew, after Michael died, and we're glad because it means he looks over you and looks after you. And funny thing is, we are so close, we are as close as a brother and sister. But she had gently been saying to me for a long time, you should try and track down your birth mother, because she cared about you, she visited you a lot, and she won't be getting any younger. She could be getting dementia. My adopted dad George was diagnosed with dementia at 64, and
he had
Moore,
actually privately encouraged you, hadn't he?
he had. My own dad, before he disappeared into that twilight world of dementia, he worked on the assembly line in British Leyland. Very humble man, born in Millwall, East End. You wouldn't know that from my accent, would you? But he he'd clutch my hand as he was getting closer to the twilight world of dementia, and he'd say, you know, son, you should track down your birth mother, because I think she loved you in her own way, and she needs to know you're okay, because she could be worrying about you. And then he said what he often said as I was growing up, but if you do, don't tell your mother I said so. And Dad's words were always ringing in my ear. I'd stumbled on my birth certificate by accident when I was doing a job in my 30s. I was at the place where you get birth, marriages and marriage certificates and birth certificates, and there I found my name was Connolly for the first time. But that's all I knew, Patrick James Connolly. And Jane Moore, now she's a columnist on The Sun. She's also one of the presenters of Loose Women, so lots of your listeners will know her. She had tracked down 4 or 5 birth parents for other friends, and she tracked down her own birth father, because she had a classic girl of the 60s, like I was a classic boy of the 60s, a slightly complicated upbringing, and the man she thought was her father, she discovered when she was 18, wasn't her birth father at all. So she tracked down her birth father. So she was the expert. She tracked him down with some great journalistic ingenuity. We found her. We found that she was in Birmingham. This was a shock, because my second newspaper job, Catherine, was on the Birmingham Evening Mail. I'd assumed, because I was born in a hospital in Bristol, that Margaret lived in the Bristol area, or had me in Bristol, then went back to Ireland. No, she lived in Birmingham. She was clearly covering her tracks even then. Worked in Birmingham in a hospital, had me in a worked in Birmingham hospital, had me in a hospital in Bristol, and put me in an orphanage in Cheltenham, so nobody could. She didn't want anyone to know her secret, if you like. Yes. So Amanda was with me every step of the way. We find her in this little house in Birmingham. I thought myself, God, when I was on the Birmingham Mail, did she read my stories? Did she pass me in the street? I wouldn't have known. We took advice from the social services people who are experts in all of this. They said, don't write to her because somebody might open her mail. Don't call her up because she could just hang up. Get a friendly female face to knock on the door, and you stay out of the way, perhaps be in a car around the corner. So that friendly female face had to be Amanda. Patel.
Got it.
So we plan it, military precision. We get the train down from London. I'm in a black cab with Amanda. We pass a big church close to Margaret's house, and I said to Amanda, she'll be a devout Roman Catholic. I'm a Roman Catholic practicing, and that'll be her church. Little did I know. We park my car round the corner. Amanda goes to the house. I'm all psyched up. She knocks on the door. Nobody in. But there was a little dog barking, so she wasn't far. So Amanda's nervous. What do I do? I said, you're just going to have to wait. So she doesn't want. Unfortunately, she doesn't look like the sort who's casing a joint to break in or anything like that. Anyway, as she's out of sight, out of my, I can't see her. I see a dot emerging on the horizon, a tiny dot, and I absolutely know that my birth mother is approaching. That I'm going to see my birth mother for the first time since I was 2.5. How do I explain that? I can't. And I ring Amanda. And I said, she's coming. She said, who is? I said, Margaret. She said, how do you know? I said, trust me, I do. I hung up. Jane Moore rang. And she said, what's happening? I said, she's walking down the street. Jane didn't even question. How did I know? She said, can you see her yet? I said, just the outline of her. She said, it'll be her. If you feel it's her, it will be her. I knew when my father walked into a restaurant when she found her father for the first time. 5 men walked in. She knew it wasn't him. A man walked in. Even though she didn't look like him, she knew it was her father. But she walked past the car. She didn't even look at the taxi. I noticed her high cheekbones, which I share, but all I thought was, am I going to turn this woman's life upside down? I hope not. She knocked on the door, Amanda. When Margaret went inside, Margaret denied it was her. no blame. No, who could blame her? She hadn't had any thought or contact from me for 50 odd years, and so we did what
But Amanda
journalists would do.
showed her a photo, didn't she?
She did. We had it was a photograph of Patrick, as I was then, in a little red duffel coat, in a park, looking at a flower bed, which my mum and dad had taken on one of my first early trips with them, and I looked sad and pensive, but nothing more. And Margaret, she puts the picture in Margaret's hand, and Margaret's stroking the photograph, saying to Amanda, "He's so sad, look, he's crying, he's crying." I'm not crying in the photograph. I think Margaret was crying and hadn't realised. But she pushed the photograph. Amanda said, "It's not me, it's not me. I'm so sorry. It's so cruel." Closed the door. Jane had prepared it for all eventualities. Amanda comes to the car. We take a car. We go and find a pub. Doesn't matter if it's 10 o'clock in the morning. We're old hacks, aren't we? And I got a typed letter to Margaret, which I pushed through the door, saying who I was. I didn't say I was a journalist, saying I wasn't looking for a second mum. I was comfortably off and I wasn't after any money. I just wanted to perhaps meet her and we could...
So did you write that letter in the pub? You wrote that letter in the pub there?
Exactly what we did. And then we pushed it through the door. And then Jane rang again and said, "What's happened?" And she said, "You have to tell Amanda. She's got to go back." It's quite a big ask.
Yes, I can imagine.
It's a big ask. And Amanda said, I said, "Have another drink." So she girded herself. She went back. Margaret threw open the door and she said, "I've been praying on bended knee to Our Lady that you'd come back. It's me. Tell him it's me and tell him I'll see him, but not now, not here. I have a family and I don't want them to know anything about my secret. Nobody knows." And so we eventually made an arrangement to meet, and we met, not quite what I had in mind, we met in the cafeteria at British Home Stores in Birmingham city centre. She had a cup of tea and she didn't drink a drop of it. She was too nervous.
And also, she didn't ask you any questions, did she? She let you chat, is that right? Or was happy to answer questions about herself? But...
Well, so what happened, Amanda hung around for a few minutes and then she disappeared. So we chatted and we made small talk. And I thought, I can't get straight into this. So I asked her a little bit about her life. So she told me that she'd got married. And that was clearly why she decided to give me up for adoption when I was nearly 3. She'd met somebody. He was called Patrick, ironically. And he knew nothing about me because almost certain he wouldn't have married me. He wouldn't have taken on somebody else's child. And she told me about her children. And as we were talking, I thought, she hasn't asked me anything. And I realised at the end of the hour, she hadn't asked me one question about my life since I left her. And I thought, I was trying to rationalise it in my head. Is it because it's too distressing? She can't bear to think about how happy I've been? Or she can't bear to think all these answers because she should have been there. I'm attributing all these emotions to her. Or didn't she care? So Amanda comes back just before the hour's up. And she says, "Oh, Margaret, did he tell you he's a really successful journalist? Is he now?" she said. Amanda looked bewildered. And I just mouthed her.
She didn't recognise you? She hadn't recognised you from
journalism
or broadcasting?
TV or newspapers. And it was odd because a few people stopped while we were in the British Home Stores to sort of smile and wave. And I don't think she noticed. And so when I said goodbye to her, she said, "Thank you for making my day, my week. Thank you for making my life." She gave me a big smackaroo on the lips. And I said, "Can we meet again, Margaret? Because there are a few things I'd like to ask you." And she said, "Yes, you're entitled to you're entitled to answers. And of course I'd see you again. I'd enjoy it very much." And I won't spoil too much about the book, but there were numerous attempts then to meet up with her. And she didn't show up.
It was very difficult to read about, let alone experience.
Yeah. So... Again, there was always a different reason, and I still do give Margaret the benefit of the doubt. Was it because she couldn't face talking to me because it was reopening the most terrible pain? Had she really buried all evidence of what happened, like nuclear waste? If you read psychology, I mean, I had to have therapy over all of this, believe it or not.
I do believe it thoroughly. I actually think, certainly while I was reading the book, I thought that she was just terrified of someone finding out. I think
Yeah.
if she'd been a single person with no family, I'm sure that she would have embraced you, and I'm sure she
Yeah.
wanted to, and probably felt very conflicted. She just didn't want to explain to her family that effectively she'd been living a lie for many years, you know?
That's absolutely right. And she was a staunch Roman Catholic. She used to go to, when she retired as a nurse, she went to church not once a day, sometimes she went twice a day. She was a quiet, bird-like looking woman, steely, clearly. I mean, imagine walking up the aisle when she got married and they say, does anyone know of any lawful impediment? Oh, well, what about your little boy 45 miles away in an orphanage? Steel. I mean, imagine somebody shouting up, haven't you got a little boy? I mean, it would have been the end of the marriage. It would have been such a humiliation for her. But I'm glad she did what she did, because she had a chance at happiness and she was right to take it, in my view.
Yes.
But
and you're very generous with that. I think you're right. It must have been a lonely existence for her, and she must have felt terrible most of the time. And so if she had, as you say, a shot at happiness and she took it, then,
yeah.
But,
And
probably why her visit stopped is after she got married, right? When you were
the nuns were pretty brusque about it. When she decided to give me up for adoption, you see, what you do when you track down your birth parent, you get a file which social services got from the Sisters of Nazareth, because the order is still running, and they run a lot of old people's homes now. All the orphanages long closed down because I'm afraid some of them had some terrible secrets. There was some terrible abuse went on in some of the homes, including mine, I'm afraid. But the nuns made it absolutely clear in the letter to Margaret, you will not visit anymore.
Okay.
You must not visit.
So it wasn't even her
potential
choice.
adopters in the area, you're not to see him. That's it. So she never said goodbye to her own son.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
Brutal for her.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it wasn't a little, she had a toddler who was walking, talking, and probably had attitude.
Yeah.
Didn't talk much, apparently.
I can't imagine that at all.
Yeah. Apparently, I hardly talked at all, but I've made up for it, haven't I?
Absolutely, yes. So, tell me about Jimmy Coffey.
Well, this is fascinating. Again, in case people know about it, I won't give too much away, but she told them in the file, which she fills in the form when I'm living in a mother and babies home with her. Now, people may have heard of these mothers and babies homes. There's been some infamous stories about them in Ireland, with babies found buried in the ground. And
The Magdalene sisters went into that, the movie, and I think it's very well seeped into public consciousness now.
Well, I don't know what went on in this mothers and babies home in Bristol, but the files are closed for another 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I tried to obtain the files, and they said they can't be released because they could cause distress to people living today. I don't think Patrick, because Patrick was just a baby then. But so she, in the mother and babies home, this woman who's all on her own, fills in the form, and she says there's a prospect of marriage, and she says there's a father, and he's called James Coffey, who she says is an engineer. Well, he's not an engineer, actually, as I discovered. He's a pipe player. But there's a tragedy, and he never gets to see Patrick, and it's not clear whether he's the father because he was killed by a runaway car, an accident. He was taken to the hospital where she worked, and there is a theory that he could be what they call a toe tag father. So if she was trying to protect the true identity of the father, just say he was a married man, just say he was a married doctor, because I will throw into here, your listeners may think, what was she? How old was she when she had me? 16, 17, 18? She was 34 when she had me, and she was just a few weeks from her 35th birthday. So she was a mature woman, a district nurse. She knew exactly she knew exactly about the birds and the bees. So was she protecting someone? And what they call, I'd never heard of this toe tag father, but an Irish Catholic priest told me about it. The body is in a mortuary, or it's on a bed in a hospital. She's working in that hospital. The body would have an identity, literally a tag attached to the toe. You see the name, that'll do, Jimmy Coffey.
And obviously that set you on a wild goose chase, didn't it? Or looking for the man on your birth certificate who turned out, well, again, let's not give too much away, but a really incredible story, and how helpful his family were to you as well. That was very, there's some really kind
Yeah, I
people
mean,
out there, aren't there?
I got
So
lucky. I tracked down the Coffey family, and I even went to the place where the accident happened, and the accident did happen for
it's a
sure. And I even
horrific
found,
sounding accident.
yeah, it was. I mean, he suffered horrendous injuries, and he
Yeah.
probably was dead by the time he hit the ground. I even managed to track down the man who was standing next to him, who worked with him in the builders gang, and but his family said they knew nothing about him having fathered a child. They knew nothing about a serious girlfriend. They said because what Jimmy Coffey was most interested in was gambling, horses, and the pub wasn't a ladies' man. I suppose you could say that about me too in a cheeky way. So was he my father? And I have to say, I don't think I look like him. And there's a
Right.
photograph in the book of him. And I've had so many letters from people saying, he's not your dad. I've had so many letters from people saying, he's definitely your dad.
That's
So,
really funny.
yeah, so do I do a DNA test with the Coffey family? Answer, I probably will.
Okay. But are you, by the way, do you look anything like like your adoptive family?
No.
Or were you like a,
It used to make me laugh when we'd be out as a family and say, oh, you can see my family who adopted me. Mum was always, shall we say, she was on a diet all her life.
okay, yeah.
My big sister, who's still with us, she's been on Ozempic and she's lost 4.5 stone. We lost my sister during COVID and she was morbidly obese, and my brother's morbidly obese. And I've always been
Slender.
slightly built, and I have the same build as my birth mother. And also I had very dark hair, and my family were blonde, and they have a pronounced Swindon accent, which is where I was brought up. My dad had a Millwall accent, and I have no accent at all. Now, whether that was because the nuns, maybe I learned to speak with the nuns, which clearly I did. But when I was at school, I was always in the poetry competitions and the drama shows, and that was never my siblings. We just went to
Quite amazing, because
comprehensive.
accent is usually formed, obviously when you tend to have the accent you have when you're 18, I think, when
Yeah.
the plasticity of your brain changes, and that's the accent you usually will have for the rest of your life. But if you were 3 when you were adopted, it's amazing you didn't sound like them, or
Yeah, and I was always I was an altar boy, and always I was doing readings, and the drama teacher or the teacher would say, Andrew Pearce has such a clear, lovely, clear voice. And my drama teacher at school wanted me to be an actor, and I said, whoa, good luck with that, Mr. Lappy. My parents are never going to wear that. No chance. And we even found some TV footage from when I was 16 on something called Swindon Community TV, where I played Jesus in Stations of the Cross. I was very pleased I was Jesus, and I
is
sound
that
the
because
same.
you were one of the smallest children in the class? It must have
I
been.
was.
Yeah,
I
so
was.
you could fit into
And I
the
don't think
crib,
Jesus was
probably.
very tall.
No, I don't.
So,
Well,
so no, I don't look like my family, and I don't sound like them. And in fact, I can remember when my father's funeral, some old friends came to the funeral because my dad had Alzheimer's and dementia, and it had been a long drawn out thing. And he said, as the family walked in and we all sat down, they thought it was pretty obvious which was the adopted one.
that's so funny. And also, it's quite funny if you came from a left-wing working class family, because obviously you're known as a GB News commentator, and I wondered, that must be you must have some debates within your own family on politics and things like that.
Oh, God. I mean, I can remember in the run-up to the 1979 general election, I'm doing my A-levels at Swindon, at St Joe's, the comprehensive, the Catholic comprehensive. And there was a poster, vote Conservative poster, in a woman across the road's window. And I can hear my parents saying, who does she think she is? What's she got? Voting Conservative. And I remember saying to my father, who worked at British Leyland, Dad, you should think about voting for the Conservatives. What are you talking about, son? We're working class. We work in factories. Your grandfather read an electricity meter. Your grandmother worked in a Lions tea shop. Your mum works in a warehouse. I said, Dad, You're not listening to me. This Thatcher woman says there'll be secret ballots before strike action. Strikes have bedevilled this family all our lives because he worked for British Leyland in the basket case days of the 70s, and it used to be a show of hands, and Dad would be out again. Holidays were cancelled, all sorts of Christmas would be very cut back, and this effect. So I said, she's promising this. They were horrified, and my brother looked over my shoulder in the polling station in July, May 79, shouted at me in the polling station, shouted all the way home.
He sneaked a peek at your secret ballot.
Yeah, supposedly a secret ballot. So I'm saying, "Oi, he's broken the law." He's looking over my shoulder. He said, and he announces to the entire polling station, "This is my little brother. He's just voted Conservative. He should be ashamed of himself."
So
you know what? My brother's still as dogmatically Labour as he was then.
You know what's amazing is how obviously politics is very tribal, as you know, and people are not emotional. I mean, they're very emotional when they vote, and they don't think rationally, I think, a lot of the time. But you might be proof that actually your political standing is genetic rather than from your tribe, so to speak.
I do wonder about it because I've had some contact with Margaret's children, 2 of them. She's got 4. And they both knew me from TV. And when I told Margaret's daughter who I was, that a book was coming out, and I would never have written the book if my mum, who adopted me, was still alive, or if Margaret was alive. Margaret had very bad dementia in the end. And she said halfway through the conversation, "You're not that bloke I see on Good Morning Britain 3 or 4 times a week." And there was a terrible pause, and I said, "I rather fear I am." I said, "I'm probably the one you violently disagree with, as opposed to the bloke from the Mirror who you passionately agree with." I was only to discover later she'd often said, "I really like that bloke on the Daily Mail. I always so agree with him," not knowing I was her half-brother.
Amazing. So there are lots of questions that are unanswered from, which is obviously natural, because when you write a memoir, obviously a memoir is not like a novel which neatly ties everything up. But do you think you'll write a follow-up?
I think there will be a follow-up, actually, because there are so many unanswered questions, and I'm getting so many letters from people, and so many people are screaming at me, "Do DNA." And I think if I do the DNA test, and if it's not Jimmy Coffey, well, then the search continues. If it is Jimmy Coffey, then there's a lot more to tell about him. And it would be ironic if it is Jimmy Coffey, because when I realised I was as Irish as a shamrock, I mean, she called me Patrick, and Jimmy Coffey's very Irish, and I've been to Ireland.
Have you ever felt Irish in your life? Have you ever had any sort of particular affinity with Ireland?
I always felt Irish when I was at school, because I was the only person in my junior school in the entire class who wasn't Irish, because it was Catholic school, Catholic junior school. And on St Patrick's Day, they'd say, "Put your hands up if you're Irish." Every hand went up bar mine. "Put your hands up if you're English."
You probably were the only one who wasn't a plastic paddy.
The only one, and every child had shamrock on their jacket. So I sort of felt like an honorary Irishman anyway. But if Coffey is my father, then so much of me being related to some eminent Irish man of letters like Seamus Heaney or James Joyce, I'm the son of a humble pipe player who I would have called in my youth a navvy. But that's all right. I've never been.
But on the other hand, he also had an amazing family, which
he did.
And therefore that says a lot about him. That he obviously comes from a very warm, loving family, so it wouldn't be all bad.
Yeah, they were very warm, very loving, and they hardworking, and but they came from a dirt poor part of Galway, and Margaret came from a dirt poor part of County Mayo. I mean, she did romanticise a bit her upbringing. She said it was a farm. It wasn't, because I found it, and it was a 2-roomed house which 6 of them lived in. No hot or cold running water. That was the Atlantic. That's where they got the water from, and no electricity or gas. They didn't go on the mains, I think, until the 1970s. So, and her first language was Gaelic, and so was Jimmy Coffey's. So I'd say I couldn't be more Irish if I tried, particularly if Coffey is my father. And remember, she called me Patrick James. was the James after James Coffey.
Yes. Yeah.
But who was Patrick? Because her father was Sean. Or was, and of course Jimmy Coffey has a brother called Patrick, and I look more like him. That's another hair. We don't want to start that one running.
And I know you described Margaret's funeral, where you actually were under the same roof as your half siblings, effectively.
Yeah.
Have you had any contact with them?
I've actually met her eldest, called Peter, who's 60, and he looks like his mother, but I don't think he looks like me, even though I look like his mother.
You might not be the best judge. You might not be the best judge of who you.
Yeah, I'm not a very good judge.
Yeah.
And I got a message on social media from his daughter, and she said, "My dad really wants to meet you, and his sister Anne, who I'd first contacted, she was going to meet me, but she just didn't cope with it all. She was devastated that her mother had kept this secret to herself. And I remember saying to her on the phone, don't judge her on this, Anne. It was her choice to keep the secret." And she said, "But why would she not share it with me?" And I remember saying to her, and then she really got emotional. I said, "Don't love her any less. She's the same woman who loved you and brought you up." And so I met Peter, and then I met him with his daughter, and we got on very well, Peter and I. And then I met him a second time with his daughter. She's in her early 30s, and she got, within 10 to 15 minutes, she was crying quite a lot. And I said, "Do you want me to go?" She said, she looked at her dad and said, "I can't believe you didn't tell me. Tell me." He said, "Tell you what?" She said, "How like Nanny Andrew is."
Oh.
So it just shows again, she only was with me, I only lived with her under one roof for 5 weeks in the mother and baby's home. But you still nurture nature. She said, your actions, the way you hold your head, the way you smile. She said, "You've got Nanny's fantastic smile." And she said, and I just can't keep my eyes off you. She said, "I don't know why Dad didn't see it." And he said, "I suppose I'm seeing it now." But I think, to be fair to her father, he was so nervous meeting me, and he knew me off the wretched telly, which is a pain, really. So
they had I suppose they had a pre-idea of you, didn't they? Yeah.
They did. The daughter actually had never set eyes on me, had never heard of me, and that made things a lot easier with her. But she read the book from cover to cover, and she was pretty disappointed in her nanny. And I squeezed her hand and said, "Don't be." She had her reasons for everything she did.
You know, I wonder as well. I bet you that Margaret probably wished that they knew, but just couldn't bear to tell them. That's what I would suspect. She probably really wanted to tell them, and actually the longer time went on, the more difficult it was to tell. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those horrible catch-22 situations. She probably sat there often looking at her family and thinking, "I wish you knew what I know." And
and you know, what about on my birthday? Because she could surely never have forgotten February 1961, and that the coldness of the birth all on her own. And in those days, they had to have the baby was delivered in a ward. They were on a separate ward because they were shameful, fallen, hussy women, and it also terrible,
medieval,
brutal,
isn't it?
So I often think, and what must Christmas have been like? Because she's wrapping up a present for one child and then 2 children. She often must have been thinking, "I should be wrapping them up for 3 children."
Exactly.
Must have been difficult, but she did. But the person I had therapy with said these women are capable of bearing the memories so deep, they genuinely, it's gone. I said, but when you reappear, he said, if she started to talk about it, it could lift the lid on it, and they don't want to lift the lid on it because it would bring all the pain flooding back. And I get that. Who'd want to relive that?
Too. Me too. And also, it's just such a horrific position no one would want to have to make that choice. So,
no.
You know.
I didn't want her to be hurt. I didn't want her to be upset. The point about this in the beginning as well, Catherine, was to show her that I was fine, and that if she has worried about me, she had no need to worry. She could see that I was successful, okay, articulate, polite, charming. She thought Amanda was going to be my wife, and I let her think that because I pretty rapidly concluded that an 82-year-old dyed-in-the-wool Irish Roman Catholic probably wouldn't go a bundle on having a gay first son, so I thought I'd skip that one. She wasn't terribly keen on Protestants, so just as well I was still a Catholic. And when she said, "Is that your girlfriend? Are you going to marry her?" And I said, "Oh, we'll get married at some point, Margaret." I thought, and Amanda didn't make. She never. She played the game as well.
Yes.
And Amanda also was a keeper of great secrets, so she was very close to Betty, my real mum, my adopted mum. And when the morning of my civil partnership, she asked Amanda, had I ever tracked down my birth mother? Amanda didn't hesitate. She lied. And that was the right decision. That was the right decision. Mum would always have said it was fine that you did
that's
that, but it would have
classified as
hurt
a
her.
white lie. That is definitely a white lie.
Yeah. She'd have thought that even though her and Dad had been great, she'd have thought I wasn't great enough, because otherwise, why did he need to go and find this woman? And it's not about. It's just needing to know somehow who you are. I was clearly different to the rest of them, spoke differently, different outlook in some ways, although similar outlook. And I also just wanted to know what she looked like.
I completely understand. I mean, I'm not adopted. I come from you can tell as soon as you look at my mother, whose kid I am. But if I had been in your position, I would have definitely wanted to know.
But don't you have adoption in your family?
Yes, my cousin was adopted when he was a baby. My aunt and uncle were living in Hong Kong, and they adopted him when he was 1. He was the son of a Chinese medical student who was only 17, and she definitely did not want to be involved in his life at all, which
Really?
has been really difficult for him. But, who knows what the circumstances of her pregnancy were. She had no future with a young child. But there was a period when, up until about the age of 1, where the mother had the right to change her mind. And that was a very tense period for my aunt and uncle, who basically were, until the adoption was final, he lived with them probably from tiny baby until 1. And the mother had the right during that time to change her mind. And fortunately for them, she didn't. So, but they had the cultural thing. Well, I suppose the Irish and the Catholic is definitely part of that. But, he's Chinese by ethnicity. And so they obviously wanted to make sure that he was still connected to his Chinese roots. So he speaks Mandarin, he speaks Cantonese. So it was for them very much wanting, if they didn't want him to be a Chinese man who had no clue about his culture. So, it was so that just added another dimension to it. But that turned out to be they've had their ups and downs, don't get me wrong. He was he was a tearaway teenager. But I mean, your own kid can be a tearaway teenager, can't they?
Yeah, well, I don't think I was a tearaway teenager. I think I think probably Mum would say, because we lost Dad 25 years ago, but I think Mum would say he was all right, really. I wasn't too much trouble.
It sounds like you were very hardworking and quite, very good at school.
I was. I always had little Saturday jobs and flogging tickets for the local football club. I was always in the thick of something. And there is a theory that adopted kids have to push themselves forward and will push themselves forward because subliminally, subconsciously, they want to be noticed. Don't overlook me, because adopted kids who were in homes weren't noticed and could be forgotten about. No, that's a theory. I don't know if it's true. Deprivation syndrome, they call it. But
also, suppose you must want all the time for your real family, even subliminally, to notice you. And how better to do that than by becoming a famous journalist and broadcaster?
I know. And you see, when Anne eventually told Peter about me, her brother, and she's distressed because it's all become too much, and she's going about mum and the baby. He says, "What baby?" He says, "Andrew Pearce." He said, "Andrew Pearce?" He said, "What, the bloke off the telly? What's that? What's he got to do? He hasn't got a baby, he's gay." She said, "No, he was mum's baby." You can see a book coming, can't you? Another book.
I certainly can, yes, absolutely. And it would be fabulous to have. I suppose you've got Jane Moore on the case, have you?
None of this would have happened without Jane Moore. And I only had dinner with the other night, and she always starts the conversation with, update, please,
Yeah.
on your family. She wants to know. Very supportive, as with Amanda. And Amanda wondered if it would take an emotional toll. But actually, it's anyone who's thinking about this, listening to this, who thinks, should I track them down? You should. And if you feel and perhaps don't tell your mum or your dad that you're doing it, because you are entitled to know, and it does fill in a few gaps, and it doesn't always work out like it does on that television programme with Davina McCall and Nicky Campbell. But I don't regret any of it. It was the right thing to do, and the book, I think, has helped a lot of people, actually, Cathy, because I've had so many letters from people, so many, hundreds, and emails from people sharing their own experiences and saying that they're going to do the same, they're going to track them down, and how do I do it, and should I do it? And also from mums who gave up a child, saying it brought a lot of it back, and sometimes it brought back a lot of sadness, but most of them were encouraged by what they read. I think it's made a lot of people cry, but that wasn't the intention. But well, it made me cry, but that was just writing it. So.
Well, it certainly is very moving and an incredibly emotional read. So it'll be great to have a follow-up to the tale, which I don't know whether you're actively working on, or is that something we'll just have to watch this space?
No, I'm already working on. I think it's fair to say I've already written 2 or 3 chapters of the next book. And that might be called Finding My Family.
I was just going to say, it's
Finding
got to
My
be
Other Family.
Something, yeah. Yes.
Something like that. And the DNA test will be critical to that. And that's all got to be planned. And there's been a little bit of TV interest in it too. But the most important thing is, I know 100% know who my birth mother is now. Can we fit the final part of the jigsaw and establish who my birth father is? And if it is Jimmy Coffey, well, he was a scally, and there's a bit of a scally about me. And he was a ladies' man, which I'm not. He was a gambler, which I'm not, although I did get second place in the Grand National this year with my £3 each way bet.
Was that an accidental choice? Did you just throw a dart at the name?
Oh, I just like the name.
Okay, yeah. That's how I thought it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do know about one thing about Jimmy Coffey. He apparently had a great Irish charm, and he had the gift of the gab. And one of the great gifts, I think, well, I didn't have it in the orphanage, but developed it. People would say, Irish people always say to me, for God's sake, you're Irish, you've always been Irish. And I think Margaret was not a great talker, but I suspect Jimmy was. So if he's
well,
my
you must
father,
have got it from someone, right? You must have got it from someone.
I got it from someone because Mum was pretty shy, and my dad was really shy, and my sisters, Shirley's not with us now sadly, and my sister and brother, very shy. They would never be on stage in a poetry competition or in a school play. You couldn't keep me off the flipping stage.
Amazing. Well, this is probably a really good time to wrap up, but thank you so much for joining.
It's been a pleasure.
And I really, really hope that, well, I'm sure that your next book will be just as riveting, because I really, as well as the story, I have to comment on the writing style as well. It's very readable. It was as if I was having a chat to you in the pub, which is as if we're having a chat now, which is exactly the kind of,
I just write it as it's always been my style of writing. People always say, oh, I can tell Andrew Pearce wrote that, because they can hear my voice coming through. And so I'm glad you enjoyed the book, and I hope people enjoy this podcast.
Well, I'm going to get a copy for my mum, who's a big fan, and also my auntie, who obviously has first-hand experience of adoption. And I will get you somehow to sign those books.
We'll sort that out. That would be easy to do. I'll come and find you. We'll have a cup of tea and I'll sign them for you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Cathy. Andrew. Okay.
Lovely to meet you.
Yes, you too.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Indie Book Club. I'm your host, Cathy Evans from Inkspot Publishing, who sponsor all these podcasts. To all cooks, dog walkers and drivers out there, we'd love to see you next time. Bye.